A very squeaky chair is going to be very annoying. Let's start. I mean, as first, I'll say, James, I think you seem like you make a really good primary school teacher. And I always thought when I was growing up that being a primary school teacher was probably my backup career if this didn't work out. So it probably might still end up being my future. Who knows? But I'm interested to know, what were your backup careers when you were sort of when you sort of got into acting? Was there anything that you had as a kind of alternative?
No, but I was always going to be an astronaut. When I was a kid, I was absolutely sure I was going to be an astronaut. I think I'm actually too tall. I'm too tall really to fit into the spacesuits. But that's what I always wanted to be. And then at primary school, there was a big glossy picture book of the stars, and I basically wanted to go to Saturn or Jupiter or something like that. And I was flicking through the pictures, and I got my first ever paper cut. And somehow in that process, I managed to associate the pain from the paper cut with the pain of being an astronaut, and I let it go because of a paper cut. I could be in space on the ISS right now, but for a paper cut when I was 8 years old.
Well, I mean, William here, I mean, you get to be an astronaut. You get to kind of fulfill dream through being an actor. But I interviewed an actress recently. I interviewed Ariana DeBose, who starred in a space set drama called ISS recently, and I assumed she'd been working in a zero gravity kind of chamber, but it turns out it was all harness work. I wondered what the case was here on Constellation, how the experience was for you.
Yes, it's harness work, but it's making the harness work not look like harness work, and that is the real craftsmanship of being an artist. And the ISS is a duplication of what's really in space. So now you're interacting with all the material that real astronauts will interact with. So it was just a wonderful experience, and I think folks are gonna really love to see that and go on that journey. Like you were saying,
Did you get a paper cut?
I did not get a paper cut.
So it was cool.
Yeah,
my fears were unfounded.
Yeah, it was cool. But had you been an astronaut, you may not have been an actor, and we need you to be in this medium right here.
What could have happened if I'd have been in space, man? I could have, fixed a few things.
Well, but James, I was going to say, because I know this might sort of sound a bit silly, but I know you haven't fulfilled your dream perhaps to be an astronaut, but do you think there's something comparable emotionally with being an actor and being an astronaut? This is for both of you. I mean, you're both away from your family for kind of lengthy periods of time, and you go off to shoot a project. You're away with a kind of very close-knit kind of collective of people with your cast and your other crewmates. Do you think you were able to draw, or you can draw on those kind of real-life experiences being an actor to help you get into the headspace of an astronaut?
I think that's for you.
Yeah, I think the misconception is that there's separation. You're accessing the same space and time in your own life. Will and Paul, there's no different. I always look that I have to get the spirit of the role. So if I'm away from my family, I'm away from my family. If I'm away from my family and Paul's away from his family, he's away from his family. And that allows you to be real and engage in the moment. And I think viewers are going to see that. They're going to see that you're really going through those emotions. And I was just explaining to James is that, a lot of the physical injuries that Paul had on his body, I experienced them on my own physical body. And I know that, okay, cool, that means that I'm really tapped into the work that we're doing, and I know it's going to be amazing.
But no paper cuts. And I think that's not a spoiler. That's okay to let everybody know. Neither he nor Paul got a paper cut.
No paper cut.
If given the opportunity, would either of you go to space if they do this kind of space tourism stuff now? Because I'd be petrified, I think, to be
doing
up there.
Space tourism. I want to go and see Saturn and Jupiter. I don't need to just go to the edge of the Earth. That's not interesting to me. I want to go and see Saturn and Jupiter.
Well, it's hard on the body. When you come back from space, you spend a year in space, you have to learn how to walk again. And I think, no one really thinks about that. And you feel that, even though we don't cover that in the show, you feel that distance when you are with Joe and you're with Magnus and you're with Henry and you're with Paul. You feel that they've been away for so long that there is an adjustment. And that's life. If you go off to somewhere for 6 months and then you come back, you're not the same. And you have to cope and deal with those things.
And I sort of started off, obviously, mentioning the fact you play a primary school teacher, Miss James. Well, I actually met up recently with a drink with my old year 6 teacher. So that's the final year of primary school. I just wondered if either of you ever kept in touch with any teachers from your educational period, and if were there any that sort of stood out and had a lasting imprint on both of you?
I would say Miss Winstead, my 5th grade teacher. She's reading a book called Free Willy, and I'm just crying, you know, in the way that she would pronounce the words and, you know, her passion for, you know, reading and sharing, and all the kids are around. I didn't know at the time that she was giving me art to do and performance art. And I have to thank her right now. I'm sitting here right now because of that one day and her passion for reading that book and how it changed my life.
Yeah, I had a teacher called Mr. Noel Payton who encouraged me enormously at secondary school. But when I was at drama school, there was a man called Colin Cook who was the head of acting at Lambda in the UK. He is responsible for many successful British actors being as successful as they are, and he just passed away actually the other week. So I'm glad that you asked that. I'd like to give a shout out to him. He gave us the greatest notes I've ever heard. You'd do a scene and he'd say, "Now you're taking me by bus, and I need to go by taxi." And you would be left to try and work out what on earth that meant and how would you take him by taxi. But he was a great man, so I'm glad that I got to mention his name today.
God bless good teachers. Thank you so much, guys. Best of luck with the release of the show.
Thank
you.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching Hey You Guys!
Hey, you guys!
Hey, you guys!
Hey, that's what they all say.
Hey, you guys!
Hey, you guys!